In the late 1990s, a storm was raging in West Africa. A civil war so brutal, so unforgiving, that it shocked even the most hardened peacekeepers. Sierra Leone, once a land of green hills and diamond-rich rivers, had been consumed by a darkness that seemed endless. Rebel militias roamed freely. Villages were razed. Children were forced into battle. And civilians paid the ultimate price. The world watched. And for a moment, it seemed like Sierra Leone would fall. But then, something changed. The United Nations assembled a force drawn from nations willing to put their soldiers between life and death, chaos and peace. And from East Africa, thousands of miles away, one military would rise to that call with quiet determination: the Kenya Defense Forces. This is the story of their mission. A chapter of courage written far from home, in a land desperately searching for a dawn it had almost forgotten. This is the story of KDF in Sierra Leone. In early 2000, the first Kenyan battalions touched down on Sierra Leonean soil. They were entering a country trembling on the edge of collapse. The mission was unlike any other. This was not conquest, not retaliation. This was Stabilization Street. By street, village by village, heart by heart. The Kenyan troops arrived to a capital city, Freetown, drowning in fear. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Makeshift roadblocks littered every highway. Humanitarian workers moved only under armed escort, their white vehicles a stark contrast to the surrounding devastation. The RUF, or Revolutionary United Front, had pushed the very gates of the capital, their brutal reputation preceding them. For the people of Freetown, the arrival of the blue-helmeted peacekeepers was a lifeline, a fragile shield against the terror that lurked just beyond the city limits. As the Kenyan soldiers disembarked from the UN transport planes, their boots hitting the hot tarmac, they carried not just their weapons, but the hopes of a nation on the brink. Hope followed them into the streets, a silent but powerful force against the chaos. The Kenyan deployment under the United Nations mission in Sierra Leone UNAMSIL was given one of the mission's most sensitive and critical responsibilities: secure the capital, Freetown. This was the nerve center of the country, and its fall would mean the end of any organized resistance to the rebels. The mandate was clear, but incredibly complex. Reopen humanitarian corridors to allow food and medicine to reach the starving population. Protect civilians trapped by the crossfire, and methodically push back the rebel factions terrorizing the country. But Sierra Leone was not simply unstable, it was dangerously unpredictable. Rebel groups, especially the RUF, were heavily armed, highly mobile, and embedded deeply within rural territories they had controlled for years. They knew the terrain, the jungle paths, the hidden valleys. For them, peacekeepers were targets. Aid workers were targets. Civilians were targets. The KDF had to operate in a battlefield where every street corner could hide an ambush, every deserted village a trap. The initial days were a tense adjustment. The humid air was thick with suspicion. The Kenyan soldiers, accustomed to different climates and terrains, had to quickly adapt to the dense West African jungle and the claustrophobic urban warfare of Freetown as sprawling slums. Their commanders knew that discipline would be their greatest asset. Every patrol was a calculated risk, every interaction with the local population a delicate balance of authority and empathy. Yet Kenya's soldiers moved with calm precision, establishing checkpoints, securing key installations, and beginning the painstaking work of creating a zone of safety in a sea of violence. In the months that followed, the Kenyan contingent faced multiple clashes with rebel groups attempting to disrupt the UN's advance. The peace was fragile, and the rebels tested it constantly. Convoys carrying essential supplies were ambushed on lonely jungle roads. Key routes were mined, turning simple logistical runs into life-or-death ordeals. Snipers, hidden in the dense forests or the upper floors of abandoned buildings, targeted peacekeepers with chilling accuracy. But the KDF responded with the discipline it was known for. They broke sieges laid on isolated communities. They repelled coordinated rebel attacks on their positions, holding the line under intense fire. They maintained control of critical zones around Freetown zones that, if lost, would have allowed the rebels to pour into the capital and throw the country back into total chaos. These were not grand, sweeping battles, but a relentless series of sharp, brutal encounters. Each one was a test of nerve, training, and resolve. In one notable incident, a Kenyan patrol came under heavy fire from a well-entrenched RUF position. Instead of retreating, the unit methodically outflanked the attackers, neutralizing the threat while ensuring no civilians were caught in the crossfire. This combination of tactical skill and restraint became a hallmark of the Kenyan presence. One commander later said, "We were not just soldiers here. We were lifelines. If we failed, millions would feel it." That understanding that their mission was fundamentally about protecting human life guided their every action, even in the heat of battle. But the most powerful battles fought in Sierra Leone were not with rifles. They were battles against hunger, against fear, against despair. The true measure of the KDF's success was not in territory gained, but in lives saved and hope restored. Kenyan soldiers escorted aid convoys deep into regions that had been cut off for months, places where starvation was a greater threat than any bullet. The sight of their armored personnel carriers leading trucks filled with food and medicine became a symbol of deliverance for countless isolated villages. They reopened schools that had been shuttered for years, their playgrounds silent and empty. The sound of children's laughter returning to these spaces was a victory in itself. They repaired roads and bridges, not just for military logistics, but to reconnect communities, to allow families to reunite, to let commerce, however small, begin to flow again. They guarded hospitals where wounded civilians lay silently, waiting for the war to end, providing a security blanket that allowed doctors and nurses to do their life-saving work. In the sprawling refugee camps, a unique bond formed. At first, the children were hesitant, their eyes filled with the trauma of what they had seen. But soon, they ran toward the Kenyan peacekeepers, drawn by the blue helmets, the calm voices, and the undeniable sense of safety they brought. The soldiers would share their rations, play football, and offer a moment of normalcy in a world that was anything but. Little by little, day by day, through these small but profound acts of humanity, the nation began to breathe again. As the UN reinforced its presence, the tide began to turn. The relentless pressure from peacekeepers, including the stalwart Kenyan forces, started to wear down the rebel factions. Disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs expanded, offering fighters a way out of the conflict. Freetown, once a battleground, transformed into a recovering capital. The sounds of gunfire were gradually replaced by the sounds of construction, of markets reopening, of life returning. Through all this, Kenyan troops remained at the heart of the mission. They helped secure newly liberated towns, standing guard as former residents cautiously returned what was left of their homes. They protected UN observers who were monitoring the fragile ceasefire agreements and overseeing the disarmament process. And they continued to dismantle the remaining pockets of resistance, ensuring the peace was not just signed on paper, but enforced on the ground. Their presence stabilized regions that had been under rebel influence for nearly a decade. When a major crisis erupted in May 2000, and hundreds of UN peacekeepers were taken hostage by the RUF, threatening to derail the entire mission, Kenyan forces were among those who held their ground, helped restore control, and kept the mission from collapsing. Their courage in that critical moment became a symbol not of dominance, but of unwavering duty. By 2001, as stability slowly returned to the weary nation, Sierra Leone stood on the path to peace. A peace that was fragile, hard-earned, and incredibly precious. The time had come for the Kenyan contingent to prepare for their departure. They left behind a legacy not written in victory parades or grand monuments, but etched into the very fabric of the nation's recovery. It was a legacy found in rebuilt villages, in reopened schools, in the faces of children who could now imagine a future. It was a legacy of lives protected from the brink of annihilation. To this day, in the hills of Freetown and the villages of the interior, stories remain. Stories passed down from parents to children, of the soldiers from a distant land who came when they were needed most. Stories of the Kenyan soldiers who stood their ground with quiet professionalism. Stories of discipline, of sacrifice, and of a quiet, profound heroism that sought no glory, only peace. They came as peacekeepers. They left as brothers. This was Kenya's mission in Sierra Leone.